Is ingeskakel op 'n GROOTplaas. Ons gas saam met ons vanoggend is Zakiyya Ismail. Sy is van die Afrika Senter vir Biodiversiteit se navorsingskoördineerder van Plaagdoders. Zakiyya, good morning and welcome to GROOTplaas.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me on.
So, can you maybe tell us why is the African Center for Biodiversity calling for a ban on glyphosate in South Africa?
Okay, so we have glyphosate has been approved in South Africa for many years now, and it's actually a widely used herbicide, specifically with genetically modified herbicide-tolerant maize, GM maize. The information and the research and the resources that the South African government had been using, like one of the major studies that established the safety of glyphosate, has now officially been retracted based on the fact that there was ghostwriting in that. The lead authors were from the industry, and then that the science that was used are all internal, non-peer-reviewed studies by industry. So that's been officially retracted, and which reflects that there's a flaw in our approval because it's based on something that's no longer valid. There are multiple, the research body is growing that shows adverse health outcomes and environmental outcomes of continued use of glyphosate. And a recent, very concerning recent study has shown huge carcinogenic effects. And finally, in the United States, there are billions of dollars worth of lawsuits being won, and fines are being paid by Bayer, who sells glyphosate, and they bought over from Monsanto. So the court is recognizing as well that the science leans towards adverse health outcomes for human beings. And we're asking our government to take that seriously into consideration and ban glyphosate here in South Africa as well.
So when it comes to food products, there was a lab study done, and which of these food products were found to contain glyphosate residues?
We looked at 4 products, Impala maize meal, Snowflake, wheat flour, Sasko white bread, and we looked at Nestle Cerelac wheat cereal. So we found glyphosate in the glyphosate and AMPA in the Impala maize meal. We found glyphosate in the snowflake flour, and then trace amounts of both glyphosate and AMPA in the bread, and trace amounts of glyphosate in the Nestle baby cereal.
So, in the current legislature, what are the legal limits that exist for glyphosate residues in products in South Africa?
Okay, so kind of the way the limits work is per crop. So there's a published rate for glyphosate in maize, but there's no published limit for AMPA, which is what happens when maize breaks down and it's very persistent, has its own toxicological profile. There's no MRL, so maximum residue limit for glyphosate in any wheat products. So why it's in the baby cereal, why is it in bread, why is it in snowflake flour, that remains unanswered, because if there's no MRL, it means it's actually not necessarily banned, but it's not approved for use generally in wheat farming. What the numbers are actually telling us, that if it's used on farms, there's absolutely no way to keep it off our plates and outside of our bodies. And that's the main core problem that we're really concerned about.
So you referred to AMPA. Can you maybe just tell us what exactly that is and why it was needed to be tested in the study?
Okay, so when glyphosate breaks down, one of the things that it breaks down to a metabolite is something called AMPA. Because AMPA is so persistent, and because it has its own toxicological profile, so it has its own effects, it's something that needs to be taken seriously in consideration. So that speaks to like a gap in the regulations, that it's not recognizing a metabolite that is present and persistent and has its effects on body. And yeah, so the fact that there's AMPA means that there was glyphosate and it has now broken down.
Zakiyya, we'll be back with you in a second. Zakiyya Ismail, sy is van die Afrika Sentrum vir Biodiversiteit, die navorsingskoördineerder daarso van Plaagdoders. Ons gaan nou verder met haar gesels, maar nou eers tyd vir die Grootplaas kalender. Jy is ingeskakel op Grootplaas. Ons gas saam met ons vandag, Zakiyya Ismail. Sy is van die Afrika Sentrum vir Biodiversiteit en sy is die navorsingskoördineerder van Plaagdoders. Zakiyya, so you mentioned that the African Center for Biodiversity, you want the Minister of Agriculture to take some action regarding the glyphosate. What is this actions that you guys want?
Well, we want a ban on glyphosate, for sure. However, what we're not saying you ban it today and tomorrow it's totally off the market. What we're saying is that farmers need to be supported in this process to transition out of glyphosate dependence. I think just moving away from being so dependent on a particular pesticide that's showing, or herbicide that's showing adverse effects, is essential for our food security, so that we have a more diversified farming systems. And so to ban it would be to deregister, to support farmers to transition out of glyphosate dependence into more sustainable alternatives.
So would this whole conversation then tie into the global conversation of getting rid of genetically modified foods?
I mean, that would take it very far, because our maize and soya is kind of 90% genetically modified currently in this country, which has its own concerns for our independence on seed systems. So we're completely dependent on getting seed from an international company, getting herbicides from an international company. So even though we're growing locally, the external dependence is way too high. Genetically modified foods, there's a whole research base on that, on the harmful effects of that on human health and on environmental health. So getting rid of glyphosate, yes, would definitely get rid of genetically modified maize in our country, which would be even doubly useful to our overall long-term sustainable health in our terms of farming and our quality of food.
So can you maybe just quickly tell us what is the NOEL levels that you test for, and then how much maize meal would an average 70 kilogram adult need to eat daily to exceed these levels?
Okay, if I can rephrase that question, is that it's not really about how much you have to eat, because if we just look at it so simplistically, then say, oh, you'd have to eat, I don't know, how many kilograms of maize for it to have an effect. That's not a healthy way of looking at it. It's to say that we're getting exposed chronically, daily, multiple times a day. It's not just 70 kilogram people that are eating it. It's children eating it, that babies maybe weighing 10 kilograms, whose digestive system, organs are still maturing. We're saying that it's not only glyphosate that we're consuming, there's what else? There's a whole range of other pesticides. So there's a cocktail effect of multiple carcinogens, things that disrupt our gut health, things that disrupt our hormone system. So there's like this multi-pronged attack on our bodies that we have to fight off, which we do really well because every day you eat your food and you still get up and go to work as well and do things. However, it's the chronic impact on health on an already stressed population, especially in South Africa. And then, so it's stressed population. It's a population that has no access to alternatives because these are staples that are in our food basket. And it's also foods that are grown in a way where the nutritional quality is lowered, because there's also that aspect of glyphosate usage that, like in comparison, maize grown with glyphosate has lower nutritional profile than those without. It's that cumulative effect. If we just look at it in terms of how much do you need to eat for that to have an effect, then it's very reductionist because it's not about one meal. It's about eating it daily, multiple times a day across a population that is of multiple weights, multiple health status, immunocompromised, healthy, that range. And so if you ask consumers, what is an acceptable amount to you to put into your body? And you compare that question to what an industry expert or somebody from that sells the products would say, consumers would say, actually, I don't want it in my food at all. And I mean, that's a question you could ask yourself. How much are you willing to accept into your diet daily?
Zakiyya, thank you so much for chatting to us this morning. Zakiyya Ismail, sy is van die Afrika Sentrum vir Biodiversiteit. Sy is die navorsingskoördineerder daar van Plaagdoders. Dis al wat vir ons tyd het vir Grootplaas vir vandag. Ons hoop jy het lekker saam met ons gekuier en dan sien ons mekaar weer môre.